All right, we're decoding Union Budget 2021, and what a budget it's turned out to be, both in terms of signaling its intent for further reform and also not shying away from big-ticket spending. Joining me now to decode the budget further, Dr. Surjit Bhalla is Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund. Thanks very much, Dr. Bhalla. Always a pleasure speaking with you. What's the big picture takeaway for you? What is the direction? What is the signaling from the budget? And overall, I think the big question everybody's asking is this budget enough to put India back on the high growth trajectory?
So let me answer the last part first, which is, and there are several big pictures, but I think it is definitely going to put India back on the growth trajectory. And I think it's a well-crafted budget. I can't remember the last time I was witness to a budget so well-crafted and with all the dots in place. This is what India needed. This is what many of us had argued for, and it is fantastic that the government has delivered. There is the usual naysayers will say that the problem is in the implementation. Well, if that's the only criticism that people can offer for this budget, then it is definitely an A+ budget.
Can you elaborate, though, why do you call it an A+ budget? Could you give us some specifics of, for you, what the big takeaways are?
Several, and we've discussed that earlier over the years and even as recently as a few months back. Take, for example, the fiscal deficit number that has come out to be somewhere like 9%.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the first time that I can remember, the fiscal deficit has been put to the back burner. It is not the driving force behind a budget. So that's number one. Number two, and all of these are related, the budget did not make any tax changes whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think it's laid the groundwork for a direct tax code, which many of us have been arguing in the government for next year. Third, privatization for the first time in my memory, actually first time ever, in India is no longer a 4-letter word. You know, India gave to the world, to the English dictionary, a new word called disinvestment. That is now also been to the dustbin of history. So that is just for starters as to why this budget is radically different than any other. Also, you know, I think when historians and economists and journalists look at how India has performed relative to other countries in terms of COVID, what we have all noted is that rather than go for fiscal deficit expansion in the very first year, the government went instead for cleaning up the monetary sector and bringing real interest rates and therefore giving the stimulus to a large decline in real interest rates. This year, now, and we've also seen in terms of tax compliance, that the tax compliance is really, for lack of a better word, zooming. And I think we are now, all of this, and so this year, the government can go in for a large fiscal deficit, and I believe, I would forecast, and I'm happy to be, not happy to be proven wrong, but I'm leaving it on the table, that the fiscal deficit estimate given by the government for 21-22 will turn out to be an overestimate. In other words, tax collections will be higher. The fiscal deficit will be lower than even the 9.4%.
How do you counter the criticism that's come? I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the first part of the program. Some economists, some of the opposition folks were also suggesting that by not putting money directly in the hands of the middle class or the poor, the government has missed an opportunity?
Look, this is a criticism that has been there throughout 2014-15, ever since the Modi government came to power. And let's just, I think, look at what the facts state, not what commentators state. This government has done more for the bottom 50, 60% of the population and putting money into their pockets than any government in Indian history. Mm-hmm. So it depends who you're talking about. I mean, that is why, at least I've argued, the government has done so well electorally, is precisely because it is putting money to those most in need, including now, as I mentioned earlier, monetary policy was hurting growth. And what the government did, and the RBI took the opportunity of COVID and the universal recommended need for stimulus by cleaning up or beginning to clean up. Let's make it fair.
Yeah.
The monetary sector, the real interest rates. And there you also have in this budget announcements of banks being privatized, insurance company being privatized. And here's another forecast. I've seen some of the criticism that, listen, every year we come up with an estimate of disinvestment
target,
now,
yeah.
It's inflation, and they're not reached. Here's another one. It will be reached in 21-22. The stage is now set for India to assume its path and to assume its destiny.
So final word, if you put all of this together, whether it's raising the FDI cap in insurance, whether it's the announcement of privatization of 2 banks and a life insurance company, the LIC IPO, the whole bad bank thing, which folks like you and others have been speaking for a number of years now, if all of this falls in place, and there is always, as you yourself said, execution has always been an Achilles heel, but if all of this falls in place, do you think there will also get created a constituency in this country for a general direction for reforms, a reform constituency, as it were?
I think the reform constituency is already quite large. And the unfortunate reality in a democracy is that the opposition will fuel the environment where nothing is being done, where reforms are not being done. So I think I would phrase it slightly differently. I think the opposition constituency saying that no reforms are being done, etc., giving the reforms a bad name, they are the ones who will get a bad name. One other point, Zaka, I want to point out.
Yeah.
A lot has been discussed over the last several years, including this year, about health and education expenditures.
Correct.
And in particular, that the health expenditure was only 1% of GDP and the education expenditures were only 3% of GDP. Well, these numbers are the government expenditures. Health expenditures, even before COVID, was 6% of GDP, which is very comparable to other countries. Education expenditures were also 5 to 6% of GDP. Obviously, I'm including both private and public. Right. And so therefore, the composition, what this government has done is change the composition more towards public expenditures.
All right, we'll leave it at that, Dr. Bhalla, because of the paucity of time. But as always, a pleasure speaking with you. We'll see how these reforms roll out. We've been crying out loud for a number of years. Folks like you have been crying out loud for a number of years for these reforms, whether it's the idea of a bad bank, whether it is divestment, whether it's privatization, getting the government out of areas that the government has no business to be in. All of these things have been announced. We'll see how it plays out through the course of this financial year. Quick break. When we come back in our final segment, we have 2 more special guests. Union Water Resources Minister Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, the Jal Shakti Minister, will be joining us. Massive outlays for the Jal Jeevan Mission. We'll also get a word in from the CEO of the Niti Aayog. Those 2 interviews right on the other side.